talks about fiscal sanity, his record does not match his rhetoric.
Being lectured by the president on fiscal responsibility is a little bit like Tony Soprano talking to me about law and order in this country.
Welcome back. We got here. It's Election Day, and coming up, Election Day voting will be ending several hours from now, but the litigation may linger. We'll check in with a pair of lawyers of the 2000 presidential legal battle in just a few minutes. But first, Decision Day, the moment both candidates have been working toward for months, even years. Americans are making their voices heard today across the country. President Bush is planning to watch election results tonight at the White House, where he returned this afternoon. Earlier, he made a final campaign visit to Columbus, Ohio, where he thanked campaign workers. He told supporters he's confident of a win in their state. The president voted this morning near his ranch in Crawford, Texas. Senator Kerry is spending much of this election day in Boston. Earlier this afternoon, he voted at the Massachusetts State House. By most accounts, the senator is energized and confident. Tonight he attends an election night celebration, as the campaign is calling it, in Boston's Copley Square, where he'll be watching the results with family members. 4 years ago, Tim Russert said the election was all about Florida, Florida, Florida. This time around, many are saying the results could balance on a different state, Ohio ×3. MSNBC's Chris Jansing is in Cleveland today, monitoring the action in this key battleground state. Chris, what's it look like?
Well, it's looking pretty good so far, Lester. There was a flurry of last-minute lawsuits. There was a report of some harsh words exchange at one polling place this morning. One polling worker said he tried that someone tried to throw him out. But basically, the main problem seems to be too many people want to get out and exercise their right to vote. Joining me to talk about the state of the race in Ohio is Bob Bennett. He is the Republican chairman of Ohio. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks.
Have you ever seen anything like this? I mean, I hear about lines everywhere.
I think we're going to have a record turnout. We do have lines everywhere, but we've dispatched additional voting devices into our precincts where the lines are the heaviest, and I anticipate that anybody that's in line at 7:30 will be permitted to vote, and I expect that we're going to have a record turnout here.
7:30 is when the polls close, so if you're in line, you will get to vote no matter if it's still another hour or two away. So
Anybody
how long
that's in
before the returns start coming back here?
Well, I think that you're going to have to anticipate probably be 9:30, 10 o'clock before we get the first returns in here this evening. So we're probably, hopefully we'll be finished counting about midnight.
We're getting to be about the time when people are leaving work. This is traditionally when the longest lines form anyway. Are you concerned that if we have 2 and 3 hour lines at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, what it might be like?
The surprising thing is we know, for instance, that a large percentage of our voters are voted or have already voted. So, and it's clear across the county, so it's no one dominant area that's coming out. They're coming out steadily, not only here in Cuyahoga County, but clear across the state. So it's a very heavy turnout.
As you and I talked several times this year, it's all about the ground game, who gets their voters to the polls.
This is going to be all about the ground game. It looks like it's working on both sides.
Now, I've talked to a lot of people this week, and they said one of their biggest concerns is that it will be another deadlocked race. Would you like to see, and you're obviously a huge George Bush supporter, go one way or another?
I think that the result will be President Bush will be reelected beyond the margin of error in Ohio this evening.
Spoken like a true Republican chairman, Bob Bennett. Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Again, this is going to be sort of the nerve center where the votes are going to be counted. Cleveland, absolutely critical to John Kerry's chances here in Ohio. They need to keep their margins up. Maybe 170,000 votes here if they have a chance to win Ohio. Lester?
Chris Jansing in Cleveland. Chris, thanks. Let me bring in NBC's Andrea Mitchell right now, who has considerable experience reporting on candidates, campaigns, and presidents, and get her perspective at this point on Election Day. Andrea, good to see you. A lot of folks have been asking me, people are asking me, well, what do you know? And I say, we'll know when we know at the end of the evening. But with that in mind, tell me what sort of things should we be looking for tonight as we begin to watch the numbers and look for trends? Give us kind of a viewer's guide, if you will.
Well, the one thing that we will not know is turnout. You can gather these things anecdotally, you can see the long lines, but you really don't know turnout until all the raw vote is in and counted. But you can take a look at critical indices of what is happening around the country. Clearly, we're going to be looking at the early closing states, and when you look at those states that close at 7 o'clock Eastern, which include Virginia and Kentucky and Georgia and South Carolina, Vermont, which is a bit of an outlier, and Indiana, you're going to look to see whether or not there's been a big youth vote. The young vote 4 years ago was not that big, but if it is now as big as 18% of the vote, then that would be, which has been indicated by some of the early polling, some of the early indications in the tracking poll over the last couple of days. If there's a big youth vote, that vote has been going to Kerry in the polling that preceded Election Day. Now, 4 years ago, the youth vote was about a 4-point edge for Al Gore over George Bush, not a huge advantage. In the polling on the last couple of days, the last NBC News Wall Street Journal poll, for instance, had young people voting by a 17-point edge for John Kerry over George Bush, saying that they favored Kerry over Bush. So that would be a big indication. If young people actually come out to vote, which they don't normally do in big numbers, that would be a big advantage for Kerry over Bush in this election.
And Andrea, there is a hypersensitivity naturally after what happened 4 years ago, hypersensitivity to so-called voting problems. I'm watching the stories across the computer here. Some are simply as someone was standing too close to them at a polling place. Others, of course, have been already settled with some legal decisions. How large will these things loom tonight? Have we seen anything that could alter the way the results or the length of time it takes for results to be certified?
We just don't know yet. If there is a state that is close, if Ohio turns out to be close, then all of these legal issues, which we've seen back and forth with judges ruling overnight and then this recent ruling that you were talking to Pete Williams about an hour ago about, if that takes place and it's a close election, then of course you will get into a situation where one side or the other will ask for a count of provisional ballots and where you will also be counting the absentee ballots. That if that's the case in Florida or Ohio or Pennsylvania, where Roz Jordan was reporting earlier today that there were some claims of problems, but where the Republicans had not actually gone to court, then you'll see problems. One of the things about this new decision that came down in Ohio is that lawyers are telling us that it came down so late in the day that it probably won't have a big impact because by the time they get all of the names and check on all of these addresses, the voting will probably be over. So unless we see some major breakdown, but so far, one of the big advantages of early voting apparently in Florida is that as many as 1 in 5 voters actually voted early. And if that's the case, they worked out a lot of the kinks in those machines before we got to the crunch of Election Day.
All right, Andrea Mitchell. Andrea, we'll look for your reporting and insight throughout the evening. Thanks for talking with us.
Thank you.
No doubt the grueling campaign season is tough on the candidates, and it can be just as tough on the candidates' families. Earlier today, MSNBC's Lisa Daniels had a chance to talk to Doro Bush-Koch, the president's sister. They discuss what it's like growing up in a political family.
It's really been a privilege to see history from the front row. This president has been so generous about including me in so many historic things that really it's a huge honor. Plus, we have a great family, and so with those two things, it couldn't be any better. I feel really like a lucky person.
We're just looking at some pictures of your nieces. Did you give them any advice before they hit the campaign trail?
You know, my nieces, I am so proud of them. I spent the last 2 days traveling with Jenna and Barbara, and I am so proud of the job they've done for their dad. They are so poised. They're smart girls. They've attracted a whole new group of people to our party, and so they didn't need a lot of advice from me. They've done a great job.
Well, you're the baby in the family. You grew up with 4 brothers. What was that like? 4 Bush brothers.
You know, you can imagine 4 older brothers. At first, it wasn't so great, and then of course now they treat me, you know, like the most special sister ever. So it's a lot of fun.
And in a few moments, we'll have a conversation with Vanessa Carey, Senator Carey's daughter, about what it's been like for her on this campaign and her feelings going into tonight. Also coming up on MSNBC, voting continues across the country with the first polls due to close in a little more than 2 hours. Up next, we'll check back in with some of our correspondents out across America. Stay with our Decision 2004 coverage here at Democracy Plaza. Well, tomorrow at this time, we could be talking about someone's concession speech, another candidate's victory speech, and the families who have fought so hard to get their respective family members elected. Well, what are they feeling like tonight? Well, joining me from Boston is Vanessa Carey, who knows quite a bit about growing up in a political family. She's been hitting the campaign trail on her dad's behalf in these final few weeks. Vanessa, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us.
No, I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me on.
I know the official word from the campaign, everyone's confident, they like the voter turnout, but beyond all that, It's been so close. What are you feeling right now? Butterflies?
Yeah, I was just actually remarking to someone that I haven't really stopped to think about what's going on. I've just been a part of this campaign, fighting for every vote into the last minute. You know, my dad is the first to admit that this is not about him. It's about a better future for America and about really just a desire for a fresh start. And I've just been so proud to sort of fight along his side to the end. And I feel very good and very optimistic about tonight, but I'm also holding my breath.
Yeah, I think, I suspect most people would think of being the son or daughter of a politician, moments of pride, moments of real tough moments of being in the public spotlight. Give me the best and worst moments of this campaign through your eyes.
I would say the worst moment for me was 8:30 in the morning, eating pancakes, drinking Diet Coke, and looking at sort of a gelatinous mass of butter, thinking I've hit an all-time low. But the high points have been extraordinary. It's actually been almost entirely high points. I've been blown away by the honor and privilege I've had to be a part of this. Standing on that stage in Iowa when we won and we surpassed all expectations was an extraordinary moment. And I think just having a chance to travel with my dad and see what he's fighting for, hear the stories of people who are asking him to win for them so that they can go to college or so that they can get their veterans benefits or so that they can afford health care. You hear that and you feel the hope and you see the hope, and I see how much my dad takes it to heart. And that's sort of been one continual extraordinary experience. And I have a feling tomorrow I'll probably miss the campaign experience, but hopefully we'll be on to bigger and better things.
Well, Vanessa, hopefully the better things will be a healthy meal for you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for talking with us. Appreciate it. And we continue to watch the voting across America. We've got correspondents stationed throughout the country, from Florida to New Mexico to New Hampshire. I want to go right now to Florida with NBC's David Schuster, who joins us from Miami with the latest from there. David?
Well, Lester, there's every indication here in Miami-Dade that the turnout is going to exceed what it was 4 years ago. Across the state of Florida, that was about 67%. They're expecting it to be a little bit higher than that today. The big headline out of Florida tonight, Lester, is that the election today has been very smooth. Both campaigns, maybe with the exception of that car alarm, but both campaigns say that they've been very pleased with how things have gone, that there have not been many problems. There were a couple of touchscreen ballots here in South Florida, touchscreen systems that malfunctioned. They were expecting that, however. There were also a few people who went to the wrong precinct, and instead of being directed to the proper precinct, they were given a provisional ballot, which is not supposed to happen. But all in all, despite all of the lawyers that are here, the Carrie Edwards campaign of Florida is saying that less than 20 people were actually challenged as far as their certification, their qualification for voting today, and that's across the entire state. And the number of Florida voters that had to file provisional ballots because their name was not on a registration list and they had to sign an affidavit and sign one of these provisional ballots, that number is less than 1,000. And again, that number is also very small. So by all accounts, it was a clean election. The biggest change, of course, from 4 years ago is that here in South Florida, in the biggest counties, they're using touchscreens instead of the punch card, Chad-producing types of ballots. And again, the results expected to come in very late tonight from South Florida. But of course, Florida is not the only battleground state where they're fighting for every vote. I will turn now to my colleague, Josh Mankiewicz, who is in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Josh?
David, good afternoon from the land of enchantment. You know, New Mexico has been a kind of a bellwether state over the years. It's voted with the presidential winner in almost every election since 1948, except two. And one of those two was the last time in 2000, when New Mexico went for Al Gore by just 366 votes, which was the closest margin in the nation. Now, there is every indication that the vote this time is going to be that close. A lot of polls have come out showing the two candidates very evenly matched, and almost all polls are within the margin of error. Election officials here are predicting a very high turnout. Almost 40% of the state's electorate has already voted early. That said, we still may not have anything by late tonight. Governor Bill Richardson, who's a huge John Kerry supporter, was just on MSNBC a few minutes ago predicting a win here for John Kerry, but a win here by only 1%. So far, the reports are that the election here has been going very smoothly. There have been scattered reports, 6 reports so far of 6 separate voting machines that went offline, didn't work, had to be taken down, but no votes were lost. The votes were all read and new machines put in their place. So the good news from New Mexico is that the election's moving smoothly. It may be some time, though, and we may be in for a very long night. Now we'll go to Rob Stafford in Concord, New Hampshire.
Thanks, Josh. This afternoon it is rainy and chilly, but here at the State House, the Secretary of State says the voter turnout is very high despite the weather. He is predicting 75% turnout. with 75,000 new voters registering to vote today. In a state of just 1.3 million people, that's a lot of voters. Of course, the Democrats say the big voter turnout would favor Senator Kerry. Republicans counter that voter turnout today is cross-party lines. In Republican precincts, there have been lines around the block. In Rochester, New Hampshire, typically a Republican stronghold, they were worried about running out of ballots, requested some more ballots from the Secretary of State, which were delivered. According to political analysts in the state of New Hampshire, the key city to watch tonight is Manchester, New Hampshire, the largest city in the state at about 107,000 people. They say what happens in Manchester should be a good indicator of what happens statewide. If it is very close in Manchester, it's going to be a long night of vote counting. If somebody pulls ahead of Manchester, they could take the state. That's the situation here in Concord, New Hampshire. Lester, back to you.
Rob, thanks very much. This election day was just a few hours old when the first talk of lawsuits surfaced from Ohio to Florida to South Dakota. There could be much more litigation to come. Reported polling problems in a number of states could mean lawyers will once again play a significant role in the election. Joining us now is David Boyce, an attorney who represented Al Gore in the last presidential race. He's now an NBC analyst. David, good evening to you.
Good evening.
We've already seen, David, some legal challenges and resolutions with courts ruling on issues involving absentee ballots and provisional ballots and poll watchers and the like. The fact that there's been so much legal action ahead of the vote outcome, does that lessen the likelihood of challenges after the fact?
I think it is. I think one of the things that happened in this election that is good is that both sides tried to get their issues resolved ahead of Election Day. And I think the courts cooperated. In fact, yesterday you saw cases going from a district court to the Court of Appeals to United States Supreme Court Justice, all within 24 or 36 hours. So I think both sides have done a good job in getting a lot of issues off the table so that they're resolved before Election Day. I think that is part of what is responsible for the fact that this election appears to be going quite smoothly.
As you know, provisional ballots weren't around 4 years ago. The issue there was whether to allow a recount to continue or not. Does the potential for that exist in some of these battleground states, that there could be some challenge on to the extent a recount is performed, how it would be performed?
Sure. If you think about Ohio, which is obviously a big battleground state and very close, 7 out of 10 voters who go to vote in Ohio are going to use the old punch card machines that gave rise to the hanging chad issues in Florida. So you have an opportunity for some of the same disputes after election as before. On the other hand, I think the election officials in Ohio and both parties have been working hard to try to get the standards established before Election Day so that after Election Day count, if it has to go to a dispute, can be resolved as promptly as possible.
And the U.S. Supreme Court, of course, ended the recount in Florida 4 years ago. Was there any case law, any precedent established for that ruling that would be a guide for judges this time around?
Well, it depends on how you look at it. The United States Supreme Court decision last time was the first time the court had ever intervened in a presidential election, ever ordered a state to stop counting votes before the state had completed its vote count. I think most people expect and hope that that will not be a precedent this time. And I think if you look at the court opinions that have come out, some favoring the Democrats, some favoring the Republicans, have all gone in the direction of trying to make sure that all the votes get counted and counted accurately. And I think that's the right direction for them to be taking.
David Boyce, good to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Good. Thank you.
Just ahead, as we continue on MSNBC, we drop by MSNBC's Bloggers Cafe for an update on the impact of the internet and of Generation E on today's presidential election. Hope you can stay with us. One of the biggest questions.
Our country remains the home of the oppressed.
Our best days are still to come.
America,
where everything is still possible.
and the greatest force for good on this earth.
The election of 2004 is one of the most important, not just in our lives, but in our history.
And welcome back as we continue one of the big questions yet to be answered this election day, the impact of the internet-driven youth. Joining me to discuss the impact of this so-called Generation E, Democratic strategist and MSNBC political analyst Joe Trippi. You're there in the Bloggers Cafe. What are you hearing about turnout, especially young turnout, Joe?
Well, that is the big question, Lester. Generation E, something I'm calling the empowerment generation, or the empowered generation of folks that have organize themselves over the internet, and we've seen them do amazing things this entire election year, raising money for massive amounts of money for candidates, and out there, thousands of them in the streets. The question is, will they vote? All the reports we're getting from our citizen journalists out there on campuses, college campuses and high school campuses, is that the turnout is huge. And we have a report from Carnegie Mellon where literally bus after bus is showing up every 5 minutes in a shuttle, pulling students up to the polling place in Pittsburgh. So we're seeing that all over the country. But the other thing we're seeing, which says something, is just like we're seeing these massive lines at the voting booths, we're seeing massive traffic on the internet. Some of the biggest political blogs in this country, Instapundit and Daily Cause, are being crashed right now because of massive hits that they're getting from people out there seeking information about what's going on. It's a pretty amazing bunch of energy that seems to be exploding out there, and I think is going to result in a higher turnout among young folks.
Just a new wrinkle in this election, the power of the internet. Joe Trippi, we'll talk to you again next hour. Thanks.
Thanks, Lester.
Keep it tuned here as we continue our coverage of Decision 2004. You're watching coverage on MSNBC. I'm Lester Holt. Right now on MSNBC, they're the pictures that describe the day. Long lines of determined voters turning out across the country to help decide a tightly contested presidential election. The polls begin closing on the East Coast in just 2 hours. President Bush voted earlier today in Crawford, Texas, before returning to the White House, where he'll watch and wait for the results. His Democratic challenger, Senator John Kerry, in the contest of his lifetime, returned home to Boston, where he submitted his ballot and thanked his volunteers. Decision Day in Decision 2004. Our coverage continues right now.
Country remains the hope of the
Our
oppressed.
best days are still to come.
America,
where everything is still possible.
and the greatest force for good on this
The
earth.
election of 2004 is one of the most important, not just in our lives, but in our history.
Welcome back, 5 p.m. Eastern Time, and that's the view of Democracy Plaza in Midtown Manhattan. Rush hour all across the East Coast right now. Many of these workers heading home and will cast their ballots before the night is over. One of the sources of valuable information we're getting this election day, along with, of course, the final tally, is what people are telling us at the exit polls, giving us the reasons why they voted and some other useful information. At our tracking center tonight, as he will be all night long, is NBC's Brian Williams. Brian?
And Lester, while the following data does not speak to the direction of the election, it is the first data we are giving out of the evening here in the tracking center. We're following the voting process itself. We're now getting some answers to the question, how worried are voters about the accuracy of the vote count in the states where they live? Nationwide, most voters feel confident about their votes being counted. 88% of Americans surveyed said they were very or somewhat confident, while only 9% said they were not confident where they lived and voted. Black and Hispanic voters are more concerned than white voters. 16% of black voters, 12% of Hispanics told us they were not confident that votes in their state would be accurately counted, compared to just 8% of white voters who shared that opinion felt that way. In Florida, ground zero, of course, in the voting chaos last time around, voters were more concerned, understandably, about the accuracy of the vote count in that state, with voters nationwide. One in four Florida voters, said they were not confident their votes would be accurately tabulated. Among black voters in Florida, those numbers are even even higher, as many seem concerned that problems black voters had in 2000 would persist. Nearly half, 46% of Florida's black voters told us they were not very or not at all confident that votes in their state would be accurately counted, compared to about 1 in 5 white voters who expressed such concern. So, Lester, again, the first data about actually getting the vote in and counted, and we're seeing concerns vary concerning where you live.
Accuracy of the voting, one of the major storylines of the night. Brian Williams, thanks. We'll be talking to you throughout the evening. President Bush is at the White House this evening. He'll be monitoring election results there, and that's where we find NBC's Norah O'Donnell. Hello, Norah.
And good day to you, Lester. That's right. The president is back here at the White House. Friends and family gathering with the president as he expected to have a dinner here with his parents, brothers and sisters, and together they will watch tonight's returns together. The president started the day in Crawford, Texas, where he voted. He told reporters he feels calm and confident now that this election is in the hands of the people. The president then went to the battleground state of Ohio to rally supporters.
Well, I believe everybody should vote. We have a duty in this country to vote, and I hope every citizen in Ohio and elsewhere does their duty. And I think I think we'll have a good turnout. And I will be grateful if there's a big turnout. It's good for our system.
Now, the fact that the president went to Ohio is a sign how this campaign views that state as a must-win state. No Republican has won the White House without winning Ohio, so the president made that last-minute trip there today in order to rally supporters. He did make a couple of phone calls himself in order to get people out to the polls. The president, when he returned here to the White House, was greeted on the South Lawn by hundreds of flag-waving administration officials as Marine One landed and he exited with First Lady Laura Bush and with his daughters and top campaign advisors as well, who had come back here to the White House after this last day, if you will, of campaigning. He has said that he feels at ease. He said that he has done everything he can in terms of campaigning. His advisors are predicting a victory. However, privately, there is some anxiety within the campaign because it's all up to getting out the vote. They don't know the results yet. They're sort of monitoring all the last-minute data yet, trying to read the tea leaves, if you will. But for now, there is a dinner planned for the family here. And then later tonight, the president will head over to the Ronald Reagan building to address supporters. It's noteworthy, advisors all this week, if we've talked to them, have said that the president does not think about losing this election. And yet his two top speechwriters have been with him the past several days, writing an acceptance speech and writing another speech. That other speech, of course, in case he does not win. Lester?
Norah O'Donnell at the White House, so she will be all evening long. Norah, thanks. Sure. Now let's turn to the Kerry campaign. We want to go to NBC's Carl Quintanilla. He's in Boston, where the senator voted earlier this afternoon, and we'll be watching the results tonight at what his campaign is billing an election night celebration. Carl, good evening.
Good evening to you, Lester. John Kerry's actually been stuffed in a room for the past hour or more, giving a series of satellite interviews to local stations, trying to get out the turnout, boost the turnout in markets where they feel they really need to give it a little push. He arrived in Boston today for the first time in weeks, greeted by his wife, Teresa, at the airport, then greeted by his daughters when he voted at the Massachusetts State House, made a few brief comments, talked about what an amazing feeling it is, he said, to see your name on the ballot for President of the United States, and talked about how he hopes the country unifies no matter who wins tonight. John Kerry tonight in Boston.
I'm very confident that we've made the case for change, the case for trust in new leadership, a new direction, a fresh start. But what's really important is that both the president and I love this country. It's really important that people go out and vote and express their love for our country, no matter who they vote for.
John Kerry is notoriously superstitious, and so today he continued a longtime tradition on election days for him, going to a local restaurant called the Union Oyster House, where he dined on 12 clams, coleslaw, mashed potatoes, sole, and a dark ale, said to be his traditional lunch on Election Day. And then earlier today in Wisconsin, one final get-out-the-vote rally. Tonight, Democrats, Lester, very encouraged by what they're seeing as precincts that were precincts for Gore in 2000, outperforming their performance from that year. They say they're outperforming Republican districts in Florida and in Iowa by 10%. And late tonight, Lester, they're moving some of those assets west, trying to follow the sun as the polls close around the nation. Lester.
Carl Quintanilla, we will be seeing you throughout the evening as well. Thank you very much. 4 years ago, Newsweek's Jonathan Alter was one of the first to break the story about voting problems in Florida. Everyone remembers the uncertainty in the weeks that followed. So could we see history repeat itself this time around? Jonathan Alter joins us now from here in Democracy Plaza. Jonathan, thanks for being here again. Are we harping on this too much? How much potential is there that we would see that kind of dispute emerge again and hold up the results?
It is possible, Lester, but that was sort of a perfect storm in 2000 where you had a state like Florida that was not only so unbelievably close, but it also was the pivot point for the whole election. And you could have some very close states tonight, but you'd have to say that the odds of the close states also being the most decisive states have to be pretty far down. So, you know, it's possible it could happen again. We're all prepared for it to happen again, but I don't think it's real likely.
But let's go back for a moment and refresh my memory. I seem to remember when you reported, you were the first to report the issue with the butterfly ballots, the confusing lineup of the candidates, which was almost an ancillary issue. Those kinds of things may pop up this time. Will it affect, if nothing else, how people perceive the legitimacy of the next president?
Well, certainly if a state hangs in the balance, Lester, then those sorts of issues, voter irregularities, charges of voter suppression, charges of voter fraud, those will loom very large, and we could have court challenges. We've had one that's gone back and forth 3 times as applies to Ohio just in the last 24 hours, and that's whether these Republican poll watchers can go in and challenge certain Democratic voters. So yes, all the lawyers are all girded for this, and it could be a big deal. But the only reason I reported the butterfly ballot business 4 years ago with Tom Brokaw, it had been going on all day. I didn't report it until it looked like Florida might really be decisive. So none of these become big issues until one of these states becomes truly pivotal, and we just won't know that until later on tonight.
And we're, of course, so focused on the potential for malfeasance all day long. We've heard charges back and forth about what some people may perceive as intimidation or standing too close to a voter at a polling place.
Right.
How do we separate the wheat from the chaff here, the urban legend from the reality of these sorts of things?
Well, I think we won't be able to separate them until after the election, and all these things will be litigated to a fare thee well. But, you know, this is kind of like a piece of pottery that's been broken and then glued back together after 2000. You see where all the cracks are. So everybody's really primed to look for the cracks. When I actually think we could just also focus on the kind of majesty of a big turnout. Everybody, whatever party you're in, you can agree that a big turnout, more people participating. This is what we want in Iraq and Afghanistan. And it looks today like we're getting it in the United States. Well, that's a good thing.
Hopefully apathy will be the big loser of the night. Jonathan
That's
Alter.
right, Lester.
Jonathan, thanks very much. Coming up on MSNBC, an update from the battleground state of Ohio, plus candidates in the public spotlight on what could either be the very best or very worst day of their political lives. Historic insight on handling Election Day victory or defeat coming up next. Live view of Democracy Plaza, the big screen where many people will watch the votes come in here with us at Democracy Plaza, Midtown Manhattan tonight. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Lester Holt. All eyes are on a few key states today. Up next, we'll get reports of several states crucial to the election. But first, we go to the key battleground state of Ohio. It's been a major stop for both campaigns and a focus of concerns over possible voting problems. For the latest on how things are going, let's turn to MSNBC's Chris Jansing in Cleveland. Chris?
Thanks very much, Lester. Well, in spite of all these predictions of potential doom and gloom, thousands of lawyers and even more poll watchers at precincts around the state and even a flurry of last-minute lawsuits. I've talked to officials from both the Republican and the Democratic side. They say things are going more smoothly than they did in 2000, with one notable exception, and that is long lines all across the state. The predictions that there would be record turnout seem to be coming true. Waits of as much as 45 minutes to 3 hours or longer, and there's a very practical effect that will have. It means we may not know the results until much later tonight than you would have expected. We're about 2 hours and 15 minutes away from the polls closing, 7:30 Eastern time. If you get in line in Ohio by 7:30, a poll watcher will actually go to the back of that line, a poll worker, and will close off the line, but everyone who's in line by 7:30 will have a chance to vote. That means if these long lines persist and a lot of people just voting on their way home from work, it could be 9:30, even 10 o'clock before some of these polls officially close. And then all the votes brought back here, those tabulations will be made for the Cleveland area here at the Cuyahoga County Board of Elections. It could be a very late night before we know who wins Ohio. What are the chances that there could be significant legal challenges? I talked to a top election law official. He told me if this race is decided by less than 1% in Ohio, certainty, there will be legal challenges. If it's 4% or higher, if it's a pretty substantial win by one candidate or the other, almost no chance that there will be any legal challenges. But there is that gray area in the middle between 1% and 4%, which a lot of people think is where this race could be. And then it may well depend on where Ohio fits into the big picture of the United States. If these 20 electoral votes could be decisive, expect the lawyers to go to work. If not, if this race is tilting one way or another, it may not matter. Lester?
Chris Jansing, thank you very much. After all the votes are counted, many campaign-weary Americans hope not recounted. One man will be inaugurated President of the United States, the other will not. For some perspective on victory and loss on a presidential scale, we want to bring in Douglas Brinkley, presidential historian and NBC News analyst. Douglas, good evening to you.
Good evening, Lester.
Obviously, you've come to know Senator Kerry a lot better than President Bush, but just talk it out for a moment, how these two men would handle defeat.
Well, of course, if John Kerry lost, he would remain in the U.S. Senate representing Massachusetts, be one of the senior Democrats, and certainly somebody that's a leader in his party. If President Bush loses after one term, he goes into that exclusive club of ex-presidents and has to, in many ways, repackage his life. Constantly in American history, you see that presidents that leave office after losing election try to come back either in a new guise. Andrew Johnson, after his impeachment, became a senator from Tennessee. William Howard Taft, after losing, became a U.S. Supreme Court justice. There are many examples like that.
Jimmy Carter, of course, a one-term president who had some rough news near the end of his presidency. He kind of went off the scene for a long time and rediscovered himself in a different way, didn't he?
Well, losing's tough, and Carter was devastated. He pushed through after losing to Ronald Reagan in '80. His last bit of agenda, the Alaska Lands Act, which saved a lot of pristine Arctic wilderness. But then he went back to Plains and basically had to rebuild his house, a modest home in Plains, Georgia, and was really depressed until late of 1981. And it was when Sadat got assassinated, the president of Egypt, who was part of Camp David, that Carter realized Sadat gave his life for peace. He would dedicate his life as an ex-president for peace, created the Carter Center, and of course, most recently won the Nobel Peace Prize, which is an honor in some ways as great as being president.
Let's talk about defeat for Senator Kerry tonight. Does he come back? Does he take another shot at it?
It's possible. I mean, I think right now it's only he knows that, his family. It's for both of these candidates, they've been through a really rough time. But remember, 4 years ago, Al Gore had been a vice president for 8 years, so he had no job to go back to. He had to go back to Tennessee, a state he lost. Kerry's winning his home state of Massachusetts. Nobody's debating that. And Gore had to kind of find a new role, and he's struggling with it still. Kerry will be right back on the Senate floor leading the Democrats in either a bipartisan effort with guys like John McCain, Chuck Hagel, and Lugar, others that are friends of his. So you won't see the end of John Kerry in public life if he loses.
It's all academic until the votes are all counted. Douglas Brinkley, thanks for talking with us.
Hey, thanks, Lester.
We've had 4 reporters closely tracking the candidates for the past 15 months. Straight ahead, we'll talk about the experiences on this election day. Our Decision 2004 coverage from Democracy Plaza in New York continues right after a short break. Election day means the end of the campaign trail for the presidential candidates. It means going home for the reporters who cover them. They join me now to reflect on life on the road during a presidential election. Becky Diamond's been with the Kerry campaign from day one. Felix Schein has covered both the Howard Dean and the Kerry campaigns. And joining us by phone is Priya David. She's been covering the campaigns of Richard Gephardt and Vice President Dick Cheney. And also on the phone is Tom Yamas. He's covered Al Sharpton and John Edwards. Thanks to all of you. Becky, let me begin with you. You have, as we said, been covering Senator Kerry for quite some time. Did he change from when he was the primary candidate to when he became the nominee in terms of his personality, in terms of the way he campaigned?
I don't know if it's as much he changed as the environment around him changed dramatically. I mean, one of the things that we've been able to do as campaign reporters is get to know these politicians as people, as human beings, which you so rarely get the opportunity to do in a general election. And that's what changed. I mean, it went from 4 or 5 reporters in a bus with the candidate for months in Iowa, sharing meals with him, jokes with him, events with him, to a press corps of 125 people where access is virtually impossible, and you really can't reach the candidate. So that's what really changed a lot. But he's stayed pretty much the same.
Right. We're looking at some of the video, the snowball fights. I know he had fun with the press corps at some point, but I want to also ask you about the technology. You and all of our embeds, you were carrying around these small little DV cameras. You weren't there with the 2- and 3-person camera crews, which allowed you to get a different kind of access. Did it happen overnight that his campaign became comfortable with someone who could be rolling at any time?
Well, I'll tell you, Lester, the DV camera with a candidate like Senator Kerry is critical because this is a candidate who, frankly, doesn't like to do television. He would say that's probably not true, but he is not comfortable on camera with attention on him. And with the small DV camera, he opened up a lot more. He invited you in a lot more into, let's say, a living room type atmosphere. There were snowball fights, there was bowling. You got to see him more as a human being than just a strict politician. And I think that never would have happened with a 3-person camera crew.
And let me ask Felix, I know you of course covered Governor Dean, and then I went on to the Kerry campaign as well. So what was the most memorable moment of the campaign trails for you?
The holy day of obligation. Oh, that's a toss-up, Lester. I mean, certainly have the Dean scream, which for all intents and purposes ended that campaign. That was certainly a highlight. Howard Dean's campaign was unique in that it started with so much momentum early on. Huge rallies in the summer of '03, which was really sort of unexpected and lent him a lot of momentum. And we were asked whether or not we thought we would be here in Boston today, and I have to quite honestly say no, that I don't think any of us thought we would be here in Boston. Burlington was certainly a good option. For Senator Kerry, this is an art form, running for president. We're in a cycle of spin, obviously, with a number of people talking on television, with a number of folks out in the field knocking on doors. It's hard to cut through that. And I think that'll probably be my lasting memory from the Kerry campaign, just the general intensity on the trail. And so I'm not surprised at the turnout today, Lester, not at all.
Yeah, and let me turn, if I can, to Tom Yamas. He's on the telephone. And Tom, you've, of course, been covering Senator Edwards as a vice presidential candidate. Before that, you were covering the Al Sharpton primary campaign. Talk about making that kind of a transition.
Well, they were both 2 completely different candidates, 2 completely different campaigns. What they both had in common, though, Lester, was raw talent. With Al Sharpton, you had someone who was a completely undisciplined candidate, but he had this raw talent that was unmatched by any of the other Democrats, and I think you saw that at the debates as well. With Senator John Edwards, you had someone who 6 years ago had never even run for office, became a North Carolina senator, and potentially tomorrow could be the next vice president of the United States of America. So with both men, you had this kind of raw talent that existed there. Obviously, the Edwards campaign, he had handlers, he had advisors, he had a real campaign. With Al Sharpton, it was a one-man show. What you saw is what you got. And let me tell you, Lester, it was a pretty fun show.
Yeah, and Priya David, you covered the Gephardt campaign, then, of course, moved on to Vice President Cheney's campaign. Do you feel as if in some ways you lived in a protective bubble all those months on the road with the campaigns?
You certainly do. I mean, when you go to these stops, Lester, you get to talk to very few people who are actually at the rallies or at the events, maybe 1 or 2, but you have very limited access to the people who attend because you're hopping in and out of cars to go to the different events with the candidates. And with Vice President Cheney, for example, while he's up working the rope line and shaking hands, you're already being hustled into the vans to get into the motorcade so that we can jet off to the next place. So you're certainly protected in some ways, which which limits you, I think. As much as you get great access to the candidate, sometimes you're limited in the access you get to the people who come to watch your candidate.
Well, Priya and Tom and Felix and Becky, nice job to all of you. Thanks very much. You've been away for a long time. I'll email you directions to get back to the studio. We'll leave the light on for you.
Thanks, Lester.
All right, take care. Coming up as we continue on MSNBC, we go live to the key states that may decide this election. You're watching our coverage of Decision 2004 live from Democracy Plaza in New York. We'll be right back.
This president has taken a $5.6 trillion surplus and turned it into deficits as far as the eye can see.
Our healthcare system is the envy of the world because we believe in making sure that the decisions are made by doctors and patients, not by officials in the nation's capital.
It is a little after 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time. A live picture, high shot looking down onto Democracy Plaza at our NBC News World Headquarters. There is the map of the United States on the ice rink. And before the night is out, many of those states will be filled with either red or blue as we watch the election results come in together. A night of high drama here. We're glad you're joining us for our coverage. Just hours to go until the polls close across the country. President Bush returned to the White House this afternoon. That's where he is planning to watch election results as they unfold. He began his day in Texas, voting near his ranch in Crawford, and made a final campaign visit to Columbus, Ohio, where he thanked campaign workers for their support. Meantime, in the Copley Square section of Boston, the Kerry Edwards campaign is preparing for what it is calling an election night celebration, win or lose. The senator voted.
You said it'd been down this road more than twice. He was high on intellectualism. Rick. I've never been there, what the brochure looks like.
And that is Sheryl Crow, who's rehearsing there in Copley Plaza, where they will have the Kerry campaign will mark the night. The senator voted earlier today at the State House, followed by his traditional Election Day lunch at the Oyster House. He'll be watching the results tonight with his family. Time to get you caught up on the latest news from some of the key states that may well decide this election. We have correspondents stationed throughout the U.S. We begin in Wisconsin with NBC's Martin Savage in Madison. Martin?
Good evening to you, Lester. About 3.5 hours left of voting here in the state of Wisconsin. Polls will close here at 8 o'clock Central Time, 9 o'clock Eastern Time. For the most part, no major problems being reported here. Voter turnout is heavy, and they project possibly a new record. They had projected about a 75% voter turnout here in this particular state. There have been some problems, though, especially in the Milwaukee area. Challenges to individual voters and their eligibility to vote. If a voter is challenged at the poll, they are still allowed to cast their ballot. An investigation would be launched later, but for the time being, that vote will be counted. And lastly, in Milwaukee, early this morning, 30 Republican vehicles that were going to be used to transport people to and from the polls were vandalized. Their tires were slashed, essentially making the vehicles inoperable to take people. Authorities are investigating right now, they say, and cannot say, actually, whether this was politically motivated. Now let's go now to Tampa, Florida, and NBC's Mark Potter. Mark?
Hi, Marty. We're at the Election Service Center in Hillsborough County. We're near Tampa, and behind me, as you can see, is the vote tabulation room. Not much going on right now, but throughout the day, they have been processing the absentee ballots. We're told that in about an hour and a half when the polls close, they'll actually start counting those absentee ballots, and as well as the early votes. And they think that by 8 p.m. tonight, they will have about 25% of the results for the entire county in, and that's because so many people here voted early. Of 626,000 registered voters here, 160,000 voted before today. That is 1 in 4 voters, so they expect some early results. Now, as for the vote cartridges that were used on the touchscreen machines today, as they start filtering in, they'll be counted, and officials here think that they could have the entire vote, or at least most of it, in by 11 p.m. Eastern Time tonight for this important swing county. Meanwhile, poll watchers and election supervisors saying they're not seeing many problems out there at the polls, and the problems they are seeing are relatively minor. Lester, back to you.
Mark Potter, thank you. Millions of voters are also deciding who will represent their state or district in the United States Congress. The balance of power in the Senate could shift if Democrats can net more than 4 seats during today's elections. Joining us now from Washington is David Broder, national political columnist for the Washington Post. David, good evening to you.
How are you, Lester?
I'm well, thanks. Explain to me which party has a harder road to toe tonight in terms of getting where they want to be in the Senate.
I think the Democrats have a real uphill fight on their hands. As you know, 5 Democratic senators from southern states that are very likely to go for President Bush have retired. So those are all seats they have to defend. Republicans I've talked with think that they perhaps can sweep, and if not, certainly get 4 of the 5. So the Democrats start out behind today and will probably be further behind when the tallies are counted.
And one of the more remarkable races, of course, is Senator Daschle, the Senate Minority Leader, in the fight for his seat.
It's his fight for his political life. He's running against the Republican John Thune, who came within 2,000 votes of winning the other Senate seat in South Dakota 2 years ago. And that race will probably be decided by 1,000 votes or fewer. And I think the Democrats for the past week have been sending out really worried signals about Senator Daschle.
And in Florida, I know there's a Senate race there that is essentially mirroring the presidential race in terms of way too close to call.
That is right, with the former cabinet member of President Bush, the former Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Mel Martinez, trying to capture a seat that's one of the 5 Democratic retirements in the South. But he has a very tough opponent in Betty Castor, the former state school superintendent. I think it's probably going to be late at night before we know who's won that race.
David, let's talk about the House of Representatives. Republicans control it right now. Are there any scenarios being put out by either party in which the Democrats could retake the House?
Nancy Pelosi, the Democratic leader in the House, has been telling people, don't count us out. But most everybody, in fact, has counted the Democrats out. Their problem is that there are perhaps 24 seats in the whole House of Representatives that are truly contested, and the Democrats would virtually have to sweep those in order to come out with a majority. It's not likely.
And looking at both the House and Senate races, are there coattails from either presidential candidate at play here, or are the voters really viewing these as 2 separate races?
I don't think you can say there'll be coattails on a national basis, but in some states, except South Dakota, which we were talking about a moment ago, President Bush will probably win South Dakota by something approaching 20 points, and that ought to give something of a benefit to Mr. Thune in his race against Senator Daschle.
David Broder. David, thanks very much. We'll, of course, be following the Senate and House races tonight. Appreciate you joining us.
Thank you.
We're on the lookout for any problems voters might be running into as they go to the polls. It's all part of NBC's Making Your Vote Count initiative. NBC's Natalie Morales is in Philadelphia right now at the call center for the Making Your Vote Count alert line. Natalie, what have folks there been hearing from voters, and are there any patterns that are being established here, or mainly individual complaints and concerns?
Lester, I think that's the piece of good news that we're seeing here so far, is that there are really no big trends. There's no huge butterfly ballot issue that's glaringly apparent this time around. What we are seeing is the system is largely being overwhelmed by callers wanting to know specifically where they need to go to vote. So these are registration calls, polling location calls, or people who do have some problems. Some 170,000 phone calls to date, we should tell you, since the system has been up and running since October 23rd. 44,530 or so of those calls have been with people who have left messages regarding some certain problem or complaint that they may have had as they hit the polls today. But all of this data is so important and is being collected by these 50 graduate students behind me from the Fels Institute of Government for the University of Pennsylvania. And Swati Agarwal is the project associate here, and she is a first-year graduate student. And I know you've been working so hard on this ever since you started here at UPenn. Tell me what you hope to learn from the data you're collecting.
Well, it is very important for the Fels Institute of Government because all of this data is going to be analyzed by them and used for designing reforms in the election system, and basically have it out that these reforms will be based on not allegations or rumors, but actually hardcore evidence.
What about in terms of the call volume that you've seen here today? Is it in line with what you expected? I know this is the first time you do something like this.
Right. We did not have a perspective as to how much we could expect in terms of call volume because it's the first time, but the last time I had a count, it was around 5,000 an hour that we had.
So it's pretty significant then.
It has been pretty significant till now. And
what do you think is, we're reporting a lot of people calling mostly to find out where they need to go to vote. How important do you think that is that they have a system like this that they've been able to turn to?
Right. It is very important, and it is good that after they are able to record their messages and complaints that they're forwarded on to the state or county's local board of elections to get redress. So it just doesn't stop here. It actually goes on further, and it is at their end that they pick up the phone and actually address those calls.
Swati Agarwal, again, great job here. Thank you, and thanks to all the students who, I know there have been 3 shifts of students throughout the day who've been volunteering their time to do this, and we do appreciate it. It is important information, Lester, particularly in this election where people expect it to be fairly close. If once again voting irregularities loom over the outcome of this election, people will certainly be looking at the data they're collecting here, Lester.
It's a great resource. Natalie, thanks for keeping us up to date on it. Appreciate it. We'll talk to you. A reminder, if you're having any trouble voting on this election day, you can get help by dialing the Voter Alert line. There's the number on your screen, 1-866-MY-VOTE-1. A lot more to talk about as we continue this evening. Still ahead on MSNBC, citizen journalists are filing Election Day reports from around the country. We'll get an update when we continue, but first, your closing bell report from CNBC.
I'm Leslie LaRoche reporting from the NASDAQ. It was a volatile day in the markets with the Dow Jones Industrial Average ending 18 points lower to finish at 10,035. The S&P 500 fell from its peaks to be flat on the session at 1130, while the NASDAQ added 5 points today to finish at 1984.
And the polls will soon be closing in parts of the East Coast here. We're coming to you from Democracy Plaza here in Midtown Manhattan, headquarters for NBC News and MSNBC election coverage throughout the night and perhaps likely into the early morning. Let's talk about how Wall Street is viewing all this. On a day that investors grabbed profits late in the day, the markets went south just a few hours before the session ended. CNBC's Leslie LaRoche brings us the latest on your money from the NASDAQ market site in New York.
Lester, as Americans headed to the polls today, investors headed into tech stocks. At one point, the NASDAQ was up by more than 1%, and the Dow Jones Industrial Average did well as well. Except then we had this election uncertainty creep into the markets in the afternoon, and we saw the markets fall from their peaks. The NASDAQ ended in positive territory. The Dow Jones Industrial Average headed south for the session. Now, CNBC has confirmed that Time Warner's America Online division, AOL, is planning to cut 700 jobs. The company is declining to comment, but the information we have says that AOL is preparing to fire the workers in December. This is all part of a cost-cutting drive to fight off a fall-off in subscribers. Most of the layoffs, we understand, will be at the Virginia headquarters, and it comes less than a week after the news that Time Warner plans to shut down its CNN-FN financial news operations. And then profits are hopping along in Bunnyland, and that, of course, would be Playboy Enterprises. They reversed losses from a year ago to rebound in the third quarter as advertising surged at the company's flagship magazine. That would be Playboy magazine. Sales were very bouncy in the entertainment group as well on the launch of new networks in Britain and the rollout of video-on-demand services in the United States. Lester, back to you.
Leslie LaRoche, the NASDAQ market site. The internet has played a major role in this election, and here at MSNBC, we've asked you to become citizen journalists by posting reports of things you've seen or done on our Citizens Journalist webpage. It's been a fascinating exercise, and joining me now is Democratic strategist and MSNBC analyst Joe Trippi. Joe, is this a totally different vein of information? Are we seeing things we just wouldn't normally get through traditional reporting?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing like the net is spreading information faster and faster. In fact, one of the things that's going on right now is network exit polls are spreading across the internet. And so people are going to these sites and they're actually reading what we're not going to talk about till much later tonight. And it's kind of a a total switch in how information is getting disseminated that we're seeing out there. But the other thing that we're getting is all these reports of bad things happening at polling booths. Our citizen journalists are reporting back to us, not just what the turnout is, but problems out there in the polls that we never would have heard about before. So we're getting quite a big difference out there in terms of the kind of information that's being reported to us.
Yeah, has anybody honed in on any patterns of problems here, or are they some of the usual problems that just become under a bigger microscope this election?
Lester, I can't hear you.
Well, okay, Joe, understand. It's Joe is down there at Democracy Plaza. A lot of folks have gathered here behind us tonight to watch the election coverage. The man who will be leading it on NBC News is anchorman Tom Brokaw. Tom, good evening to you.
Good evening, Lester. How are you?
Good. I want to pick up on what Joe Trippi said. Some information trickling out over the blogs here. It's a good point to talk about how you'll lead the coverage tonight, what information we'll be sharing and how we'll be sharing it. Can you give us kind of a viewer's guide?
Yes, we've blown up the old system and we have a new one in place. There are people who are collecting the votes, the actual votes, people doing the exit polls as well, and then separate operations within these networks to analyze what is transmitted then to our decision-making desk, as we call it. We've got a lot of computer experts who've been at this a long time. I was just with them a few moments ago looking at the large screens in what we call the early waves, the first reports that we get based just on exit polls. There were some numbers that seemed, to us at least, to be a little out of proportion to history, so we're going back and examining them again. And everyone is doing that across the board. So when we go on the air tonight, patience will be the watchword. We're not going to say anything until we're very confident that it does hold up, given the new universe in which we're operating with all these new registrants, people with cell phones that you couldn't register, that you couldn't reach before, and especially young voters who may not be in our models.
And Tom, I'd be remiss to not mention this will be the last NBC News presidential election coverage that you will anchor. What are your thoughts tonight?
Gosh, that came as news to me. Is that true?
I saw it on the Today Show. It must be true.
In fact, my thoughts are this. This is my idea. I've had a wonderful run here. These are my favorite evenings in so many ways because they are so reaffirming to me when this country, with all of its disparate parts, gets together on one day and decides on a course of action for the future and chooses its leaders, not just for president, but also in the Senate and the U.S. House. And we do that without troops or tanks in the street. And at the end of the day, even for those people who have great passions about politics and lose, they go forward. And that, for me, has been really quite a remarkable and, as I say, always renewing idea, as I've sat here every 4 years now since 1976 at this desk and since 1984 in the anchor chair. I've loved every moment of it. It's time now for Brian Williams and a new generation of NBC News people to take over.
Well said, Tom, and it'll be an honor to be part of your broadcast tonight. Thanks very much. I'll be seeing a lot of you this evening.
Okay, Lester.
Still ahead as we continue the election on ice. As the results come in these next several hours, the colors will go down right on the huge map of the country. On the ice, there it is, here at Democracy Plaza. And hello to you, too. We'll be right back. Candidates have been doing a lot of talking these last several months. Now we, the voters, are doing our talking in voting places across the country. Turnout in many places has been heavy, a lot of long lines here. But as I noted earlier in the broadcast, apathy could be the big loser of this election. I want to quickly show you before we end this part of our coverage and move on into the next hour with our prime time coverage. Here at Democracy Plaza, the thing you'll be watching a lot of tonight is the ice rink here, in which we have inlaid a giant map of the United States. And as the evening progresses, the various states will be colored in either red for George Bush, blue for Senator Kerry, as those states are called through projections. So that will be the thing to watch. Tom Brokaw will be anchoring behind you there, and just off to the left will be our MSNBC coverage with Chris Matthews and his cast of election night hosts and analysts. So it'll be a big night here at Democracy Plaza. We're expecting a lot of folks who have already joined us here to kind of watch democracy in action, both of the exhibits, and as we report the results here on MSNBC and NBC News throughout the evening. Thank you for being here this evening, everyone. Remember to stay with us. MSNBC kicks off complete election night coverage in just a few minutes. Hardball's Chris Matthews is our election anchor. He'll be joined by our team of correspondents and analysts from around the country to bring you the latest results. It all gets underway straight ahead. I'm Lester Holt. I'll see you back here again tomorrow at 4 Eastern, 1 Pacific. I'll also see you this evening as I report from the decision desk during our extensive coverage on both NBC and MSNBC here on cable. So long for now.